DC and they started played.
Welcome to the Indian Gaming Association's The New Normal webcast. My name is Lisa Johnson. I'm the conference manager for the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is muted by default except for our speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question or chat box and they'll be brought up at the end. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Victor Rocha, conference chairman of the Indian Gaming Association.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New Normal, your go-to source for insightful discussion on the gaming industry and critical issues affecting Native American tribes across the United States. I'm Victor Rocha. My co-host is Jason Giles, the Executive Director of the Indian Gaming Association. Good morning, Jason.
Morning.
In today's webinar, we're joined by industry analysts and consultants Steve Ruddock and Brendan Bussmann to discuss the recent push by several states, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, to raise taxes on sports betting. The question I'm asking our friends, is this a temporary measure or the beginning of a new trend? Now, gentlemen, welcome. We really appreciate you guys coming. And, I think this is a really interesting issue that, everyone should be talking about. Now, Steve, welcome. How are you doing, man?
Great. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Welcome for coming, Brendan. Good morning. I believe you're in Las Vegas. How are you doing? You could be in a hotel room anywhere.
I could be. I'm actually back in Vegas today, but I leave tomorrow. So in and out very quick and back on the road. So
You do a lot of traveling, man. Too much. I don't like being on the road that much. Uh, Steve, you know what? Before we go, you have a really great newsletter that I receive, a Substack. Recently, I think on the 27th, almost a month ago, you wrote from 2018 to 2022, the sports industry was a runaway freight train, blaring DJ Khaled's All I Do Is Win from the locomotive. It then entered California where something like this happened. Then you had a picture of a car crash. There was sign that the industry's warnings were less Cassandra and more Chicken Little, like in New York, where it accepted a 51% tax rate, but it was an abysmal 2020 ballot initiative in California that fully exposed it. California wasn't just a resounding loss, it was a turning point. It showed everyone the industry wasn't an unstoppable force. The industry was Debo, the biggest kid on the playground, and nobody messed with out of fear. California shattered that fear where the industry unwittingly picked a fight it couldn't win. First of all, that's some good cultural references on there. Because by the way, my wife and I, when we were still dating, we went and saw Freddie. So we still go around going, "Hi, Craig." That's still a big part of our vocabulary at home. I felt that too. And what you're saying is that, and I think a lot of us saw that, is that, there was this tidal wave rolling across the country that was unstoppable. And if you looked at some of the legislative wins, someone like me, everything begins and ends with tribal gaming. So that's the lens that I look at. Shouldn't surprise anyone. I'm a tribal member, you know. So, but they were coming in, from where I stand as a Native American and someone involved in the game, Arizona got rolled. The tribes, nobody was happy with that. Down in Michigan, the tribes felt that didn't get an opportunity to really get into the fight. It was over before they even knew it was on. You know what I mean? I mean, it was an amazing political um victories, again and again. Look at Kansas. You know what I mean? I mean, they just came in, and the SBA and Jeremy Cooten and stuff like that. Then they came into California. It was, we're going to be your friends, we're going to help you. The tribes were finally said, no way, that's not going to happen. Big fight, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent. Two initiatives failed, but in the end, really the tribes won because they get to dictate what's going to happen in California. So, but since then, you know what? A lot of states have decided to take a second look at sports betting. I think, to me, the way I look at it is that California slowed down the sports betting industry until the consequences could catch up. I think they've moved so fast because they knew they had to move fast because of Well, if you use the UK and Europe as an example, is that there's a tail end to this industry, which includes addiction and stuff like that. And when the industry is talking about fun and excitement, it's more than just gambling. You've got a casino in your pocket now. You know what I mean? And the issues that it causes is huge. And it seems like finally people are stopping and taking a second look. Brendan, how far off am I?
Oh, you really want to poke the bear, don't you?
I
Uh,
do, I do, I do.
we have a great relationship, but I'm going to agree to disagree on some of that. I think California is completely different than what we've seen across the country since the repeal of PASPA 6 years ago. Um, Sports betting has been one of those things that has been commonplace, something we've talked about, something we've done as a country illegally for decades, other than what happened in Nevada and the other three states that were grandfathered in prior to that, that largely weren't doing anything. But you've sort of hit the end of the road because what you have left of states are either ones that are more difficult policy wise, like a California, like a Texas, um, that are out there. Um, and you have other states that just aren't going to do it, like a Utah or a Hawaii or stuff like that. I think of what you saw in New York, which I know is one of the things that brought this, along the way, in a high tax rate, and what you've now since seen in Illinois. It's going to the golden goose and asking for more. And the problem is, at some point, the golden goose can only produce so much. So at what point do you just say, hey, this isn't working? So I think you got to look at tax revenue. I think you've got to look at a lot of these things along the way. And, the way that a California is versus the way Illinois is are two completely different markets. And how this looks like, it's how our system has been set up in a state by state structure.
Sorry, I had
And
moved the camera, so I'm looking more at it.
Brendan, just to follow up real quick though, some of the numbers that are coming out in for May gambling revenue numbers, gross revenues are pretty astounding. And DraftKings and FanDuel, they were crowing when they finally reached profitability and their stock prices increased accordingly. When you start crowing about how much money you're making and then you look at the receipts that are coming in, it people are still spending on entertainment like crazy, and I just feel like some of this is the hype surrounding it, but just for background for our listeners, real quick, didn't this all start in New York, where there was almost like a bidding war on how much tax a sports company was willing to pay, and the folks that said, well, we'll pay 51%, thinking that they could corner the market and pay a higher tax rate. I mean, didn't that sort of start the trend here?
The trend actually started with New Hampshire,
Okay.
which is where, if you go back when then Governor Cuomo said, well, if they can get away with it in New Hampshire, they can get away. We can easily do it here in New York. And if you go back and look at that RFP, the only way you got the full credit on the RFP was to go at the 51% tax rate they wanted. So it was a rigged system. So it was one of those going, as I always like to say, there's two decisions there. Operators could have said, hey, we're not buying in. No one bid the 51%. Bid what you think is respectable off of that. But the industry would have been accused of collusion if they would have done that. And if they didn't, it was take the bid and deal with this, because as Cuomo continued to say, the people have the solution. All they did, I mean, let's look at the economics of this. This comes down to basic economics. If I sit there and I have 51% I have to pay in taxes to the state of New York, I pay 5% to the feds, 56 cents of every dollar I achieve goes to somebody else. Doesn't take care of my ops, doesn't take care of my marketing, doesn't take care of anything else along the way. And I've still got to market my business, pay my tax roll, pay my servers, pay my geofencing, pay my KYC, all those different things out there. And then we want to say, hey, give us more, because that's what's eventually going to come in New York if that number ever dips. So that's the fundamental problem we're running into here, is legislators don't understand the economics of this. Granted, what happened in New Hampshire shouldn't have happened in New Hampshire. But the fact of the matter is, we have to sit here and look at the economics of an industry, because, as I'm going back to my golden goose reference, the golden goose can only kick out so many eggs. And at some point, something has to give. So it's either the player gets screwed, innovation gets screwed, or companies just say, I'm not going to do this. And if you can only do it, it's only on a big scale, because you've got to be able to take care of all the costs and figure out how you waylay those across your entire portfolio.
Steve, why aren't they leaving?
So, I mean, whenever anybody asks me about gambling in any sense, the answer always starts with it's really complex, right? So I think we all support regulated gambling here. I don't think anybody's not in favor of that. But when the industry comes in and says, here's what we believe the tax rate should be, here's how our margins work. And then over time, you look at it and they're like, oh, well, you're about double that now because there's new products, there's new things coming online. I don't think the industry was completely blowing smoke when they were saying, it's a 5% hold business. At the time, that was historically what it was. But now you're getting into double digits with SGPs and other products. And that's only going to keep increasing over time. So I think what happens is it gets super complex, and then nobody wants to pay more taxes. So when a state comes up to you and says, hey, that thing you told us a few years ago, that's not exactly true anymore, we're going to change that. The industry is going to say, well, no, we're not even profitable yet. Well, how are you going to change that on us? But I think overall that it's an optics problem. So the industry, DraftKings and FanDuel, are not profitable, but they're touting huge numbers to make their investors happy. You have to do all these different things where we point out positive KPIs, but then when you go in the legislative route, or you're trying to prevent certain legislation, you're showing the other indicators of your business. So I think there's this like give and take that operators are playing at the moment, where publicly they want to be like, hey, this is great, everything's going good, our responsible gambling tools are being used, all these things. But then when you say, hey, well, if you're doing so good, we want a little bit more of the pie, it gets a little problematic. And then I think the reason they're not going to leave in Illinois, they're not going to leave in Ohio, they would never leave New York unless they're like a third tier operator, is because of the size of the market. So if you leave those markets, you're losing a lot of national market share, which also goes into what investors are looking for. I mean, if it was Kansas that was doing this, it would be a very different conversation.
I remember when they set the tax rate in New York, everyone was saying, and the conventional wisdom was, listen, this was pushed by FanDuel and DraftKings to keep the smaller companies out. That was the conventional wisdom going at the point. Now, what they did in Illinois was they did depending on where you were standing, it was progressive or graduated depending on who you were talking to, which was funny to watch from a political standpoint. But it seems a little more fair if we're going to talk about innovation and stuff like that, is that these smaller companies who are not making the same kind of money that FanDuel and DraftKings. And by the way, I think it was a mistake for Jason Robbins to go on with CNBC or one of these things talking about generational wealth and stuff like that. So when people see these type of conversations, it reminds me a lot of Sheldon Adelson and Macau. You know what I mean? Right before Macau was like, he was talking about all the money he was making. Oh my gosh. And credit where credit's due. I mean, the guy was a genius when it came to gaming, and then Macau changed, before the pandemic and stuff. And then that really gave them an opportunity. So to me, I see a lot of similarities when you got these people rattling the keys to their treasury, and the states are like, oh, we're looking for more money. It just doesn't, it seems like that, maybe this is a way to raise taxes without raising them on people. And it's a new revenue, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of times tax rates, again, it's complex. So when Pennsylvania legalized online gambling across the board, it was a big fight for a couple of years over what the tax rates on casinos should be. And you had a couple of the better performing casinos who wanted the tax rate high, because online's kind of an equalizer. So if you just let everybody have a low tax rate, then we're on equal footing. But if we make the tax rate high, it won't dig into the land-based casino quite as much. So you end up with a 54% tax rate on online slot machines. So there is a history in online gambling of using the tax rates as kind of a protectionist policy by major stakeholders. It's curious that Illinois decided to go with that graduated route. I was very surprised that they didn't go a step further and create a 10% and 15% tier, which would have, I think, divided the industry. Because if you lower those tier rates, now all of a sudden you might be getting a lower tax rate if you're a different operator. And those types of operators that might be doing betting exchanges or anything of that sort would be more on board with those things. You'd see a little bit more division in the industry, but because they jumped the tax rate on everybody at least 5%, I think they didn't quite politically. I think they could have done a little better on that.
The one thing I'd add, if I can jump in here on Illinois, it was one of those that when they went to the tiered tax rate, I'll throw another term out there, Victor, off of it, that they really sort of just said, I don't care who you are, we're going to increase your taxes across the board. And that included the 5%, taking it from 15 to 20, and getting rid of that bottom tier. Because, probably the first round when it went to the tiered levels, as opposed to the 35 that Pritzker proposed, it had that lower tier. And then it was like, nope, let's just bring it up for everybody along the way. And, it really changes the dynamics when all of a sudden you're paying 33% more in taxes along the way. It's the same thing happened over, down the road. If you head straight down I-80 into Ohio, when arbitrarily the governor said, I'm going to double the tax rate from 10 to 20. All he did was screw the little guy in the ability to do that. And I say that in two fronts. One, the smaller operator that's, doesn't have the ability to take this out over 20, 30 states, as well as, the guy that's just placing wagers, that at some point that tax has to get passed through to somebody. You keep raising it, you got to pass through something along the way, because I still believe profit shouldn't be a 4-letter word.
Spoken like a true consultant. That was pure. That was, oh my gosh.
One thing, Victor,
it shouldn't be, though. I mean,
right.
We all want to sit here and make money. It's what we do with it and how we distribute it and how we use it.
But you know what? I mean, look at, here's an industry that is now, you say they're not profitable, but yet again, when you have Jason Robbins talking about, generational wealth and stuff, and he doesn't need to work. And then, you know what? Gambling addiction is the responsibility of the player too. And we only have a percentage in this stuff. So there's this type of arrogance that's coming from the industry that I think it's going to bite them in the butt. You know what I mean? And I think it's laying the groundwork for more taxation for online gaming too, like you said. I don't think that's going to get away whatsoever. And to me, how is this going to play in California? I think it's going to have to be a really good tax rate that comes in for the people of California for it to
thing
pass.
for Texas. The only way you'll get it through Texas is to buy off, those people that are, very principled, good religious conservatives, but when they see a high enough tax rate,
they're going to tell you taxes will change your sexual identity or something like that. And then that's how they're going to get rid of them. They're going to say it changes who you date and who you like. All of a sudden you're going to like trap music, SoundCloud, so I think Texas is a little different over there. And watching the politics with Miriam and their team, they have a phenomenal team. And I think Sands and Texas were born for each other, But I think we're in California. I think it's going to be a lot different. I think for it to get sold, everyone's going to have to be on the same page. And I think when you get to California, that's going to be a big issue. And I think kind of that's really why I wanted to have this conversation, because, and the tribes aren't going to want to pay that, and the industry's not going to want to pay it. But I think that's where it's going. We'll see. Brendan speaks really good. He speak well. He makes some really solid points. about but Brendan, I think one of the things that I when we were the sports betting wars, and we were talking about um a good taxation rate is 12%, 13%. And then sports betting kind of came in there also. But it seems like it's okay to turn the heat up a little more on those guys. They can take it. It almost feels like they came in and they undersold it. I think Steve does mention the hold, and I've seen that a couple times in the conversation, is that they said this would be low hold, it'll be entertainment and stuff like that. And then now, and let's talk about one of the other big issues, that 800-pound gorilla in the room, all these sports betting scandals every single week. Another one. I mean, last Friday or Thursday, I think Friday, you had like three of them, on a row, that were the headlines on every single one, talking about me, guys. I don't know players, but you know who it is.
Right.
Those different players. And I mean, it's just like, I think it's getting the unwanted attention. The industry doesn't need that type of attention, you know?
When this was first happening, I was talking to some people in the UK back in 2018, and they said 5 years. They said 5 years. That's when you'll start to see the honeymoon period ends, and they're pretty spot on with it, right? And I mean, it's not that these things weren't happening in the past. That 22-year-old athletes with millions of dollars weren't betting. It's just that we weren't privy to it. We didn't know. We didn't have the monitoring services that we have now. But you're also seeing what I would say is some of the issues with the speed of legalization and launch, which is how are these people getting through? Like how are they not on the prohibited bettors list? How are NFL players actually even allowed through legal licensed sports books to get these bets? Yes, they're catching it after the fact, but where's that initial with what we were promised and what is being delivered? How is every operator in Massachusetts allowing bets on Massachusetts college teams? They're admitting the mistake and they're fixing it after. But this is a problem, and I think it's just a problem of speed of rollout. Is what I've always said. You want to get it done before this football season because we don't want to lose the money. Well, you've been losing the money from college football betting for the last 50 years because people have been doing it. So it's not like you needed to do it right away, but that was how it was sold. That we got to create this artificial timeline where it has to be done by this point, or we're going to lose some mythical amount of money that we'll never be able to regain. Yeah, the money's gone.
All the money's gonna go to the black market, and we'll
Yeah,
never be able to tap into it. Now, you know what? Connecticut yesterday sent a cease and desist letter to Bovada. Michigan is now also doing that. Are we gonna see more of that?
Massachusetts just said
On
a
that
couple of
part.
Massachusetts regulators said they were going to look into it.
Yeah, I think, Victor, to that point, one, it's something that a lot of the industry regulators have been doing. You go back to the letter that was sent last April of 2023 by, a host of regulators to the DOJ saying, we want your assistance with this. That was headlined by Michigan and Nevada and New Jersey and others. And I think from a regulator's perspective, and obviously these are much more mature regulators than, say like my home state of Nebraska that's just been at it a couple of years, that are sitting here going, we really want to protect our citizens and being able to do this. We want to protect the people that have actually gone through suitability, done the things to do these things, and do it in a legal market, and get rid of the guys that aren't doing it right, that aren't paying taxes, that aren't doing KYC, all those different things. And those are the guys that, in some cases are the scandals you talk about last week that were all over the front page. I mean, it isn't that these guys, for the most part, or they're getting caught through the systems that are there to say, hey, so and so did X on this system.
Well, I have to tell you,
Yeah.
man, that the University of Alabama gambling scandal was hysterical. I mean, the guy shows up at a casino with another guy on his cell phone trying to place a bet, talking to him on his cell phone while the cameras are looking at his cell phone while he was talking to a guy. I mean, that was like the
Well,
dumbest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of dumb things in 25 years in this
the
industry.
NBA one too, Victor, with
Yeah.
Michael Porter betting on himself and
80 grand on an
yeah.
SGP on a bench player. It's that's what I mean by that rush to legalize. Like that just that type of fringe market just shouldn't even be available.
Right.
Brendan, how do we take the fun out of sports betting and still make money? I think that's what we're talking about here, right? Is that what we're talking
I,
about?
I would argue you don't have to take the fun out of it. And I say that as a guy that, you talk about, Steve so eloquently brought up college football. I remember working in Nebraska 20 plus years ago, and guys coming up to me after a game saying, I can't believe you didn't score that touchdown. Why'd you go for the field goal? Or I can't believe the guy dropped the ball. And I'm like, dude, first off, I'm the ops guy. So I had nothing to do with it. Yeah, I saw the game plan. I know what we called. I was on headset, all of that sort of stuff. But this has been going on behind the scenes. And to think that it went away when we legalized it, there's a transition period off of this. And I say that saying, I remember hearing from New Jersey when it legalized, 5.5, 6 years ago, going, does this mean it's okay for me to go to my legal bookie now? No, it's not.
Uh,
Wow.
I mean, that's the problem is it's education because, I think I saw the AGA stat today that most of the people that bet on an illegal website today don't know it's illegal. This is education first and foremost. Incumbent upon the industry, incumbent upon the regulators to do that, but it's also incumbent upon the media. And I sit here and I look at a media request I got last week from the Washington Post. I don't know if anybody saw that column, but the premise was all wrong from the beginning.
Right.
It talked about how bad and how the industry strived for 51% in New York. We didn't strive for anything in the 51% in New York. It was solely driven by Cuomo and his ability to try to say, I'm going to rape and pillage the industry for as much as I can get. If they can get it in New Hampshire, I can get it here. So, when you've got, and the other thing, and I know there's been several people guilty of this, you can't gamble on US elections here in the United States. But how many people, including the Las Vegas Review Journal, put, hey, here's the current odds on Biden versus Trump? And I'm like, guys, you're not helping anybody when you talk about that. So there's an education first and foremost that we need to go to, but everybody's got to be on the same page to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
well, you know what? Yeah. Jeremy Kuden, a couple weeks ago on Twitter, he said this. He goes, as a PSA, the notion that a wave of states will increase their tax rate on online sports betting simply because 3 of 38 states with legalized sports betting are or were contemplating tax rate increases at the same time is flawed and oversimplistic. So I take this personal. I think he's talking to me. Uh, so we tangle. You know,
Well, but
Jeremy's pretty smart. He's no dummy.
right.
He's I think the industry moved fast. I think in the last, I mean, this has always been, but the internet mentality now, the Amazon is the role model, run fast, break things, apologize later, from your mansion. But the industry is, I think, slowed down a little bit. I think, that graduated tax rate, I think I think you'll see more of that. I don't know. It just feels that, when in industry you talk about, the business of it, Brendan, but when you have this type of PR crisis every single week, people are going to take a look at it. I thought the PR crisis came a lot quicker uh here than it did in the UK. I think Steve, what you said was pretty smart and prescient about the 5 years and stuff like that. Um, watching
One
it
thing,
fall
Vic,
apart in the UK a lot faster.
one thing, Victor, I'd say to the graduated, tiered, whatever, regressive, progressive tax rate in Illinois. If you look
Aggressive.
at, if you look at how Illinois has done tax policy, that's how they've looked at it over the course of time. If you look at the casinos, if you look at how they did Chicago, you know, Illinois has never been a model when it comes to tax policy with regard to gaming. And I say that looking at the Chicago license alone, they took that first bite of the apple and then had to go back another time because everybody said, hey, I'm not in. It doesn't work. I can't make it work. And then even on the second round, I mean, if you look at that RFI process, you had MGM in, you had Win in, you had others that have said, hey, we're gladly looking at this market, but none of them bid in the end because they said, we can't make money to be able to do this. And now you're stuck with a casino that's underperforming, that scaled back its development. That let's see what happens off of it. But, the tiered in Illinois, I see as much more as centric to how they've looked at policy versus other states that look at a flat tax rate along the way.
I think in Illinois there's another player there too, which was Rush Street. Those guys wanted, to get even with FanDuel and DraftKings, and knowing Chicago politics like I don't know, but knowing politics like I do, I just see their fingerprints all over it, man. You know what I mean? I could be wrong, but if you look at all the fighting before that, those guys wanted to get into this. If you look at the history there, and that's where they're from. That thing came out of nowhere. Did you know it was coming, Brendan? You got a good pulse.
I mean, obviously, no one saw the 35% coming out of the gate from Pritzker. That was a oh shit moment, if you want to call it that. But I started to hear rumblings of where this may or may not go off of it, and well before it became public, I could hear that things were sort of headed that direction. Where I didn't expect was, hey, let's bump it up, as opposed to, Steve talked about was going, let's start at 15 and go up from there, as opposed to, sorry, we're raising the threshold to 20 and then going up from there. That was sort of the one I was like, okay, they're just here they want to hit a revenue number. And as I've said in other states, when you start discussing that you have to hit a revenue number, you've lost the argument, because it's all about what they're getting in tax revenue and not understanding how to do it, because you're trying to fill a need, you're trying to fill a gap, you're trying to fill whatever program it is. And, when you don't perform that, then you become the bad guy.
And going back to your original point, Victor, which is where did California fit into this, that the industry's taken these losses? So I would say it started with DFS. So from about 2016 through 2023, it was just state after state after state was legalizing, regulating. For the most part, the industry was getting fairly good terms on what the states were doing. Not in every state, but for the most part. And I always caution that this is the outlier period. This is not what I was used to before. This is very strange. And we're in this whole new world where, for me, before 5 years ago, the idea that a state would change its tax rate 3 months into the industry's launch, which Ohio did basically, is when that was proposed, is wild. Like Pennsylvania, when they reopened their gaming law and jumped the tax up 2%, was a huge thing. Like that just wasn't done. You passed a gaming law, that's just pretty much how it was. Now it's like, we're just going to change the terms whenever we feel like it. And I would be very concerned if another state were to do this in the near term, that then you might have a trend. If you have another major state, you have Ohio, you have Illinois, if you have another major state that says, yeah, we're going to change the tax rate on you, the industry should start being very concerned. And I think a lot of it was, there was a battle in California. There's a smaller battle in Florida where they were trying to get that market opened up. There was a whole DFS 2.0 battle that didn't need to be taking place. And then all of a sudden, what Brendan said, Pritzker just came out and said, we're going to bump the tax rate up to 35%. And everybody's like, what just happened? It's one of those things where Mike Tyson, like, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And that was a serious punch in the face. And I think there was a lot of distractions going on in the industry as a whole, because it was success after success after success. So you start feeling almost invincible. And even in the rhetoric you hear sometimes in the earnings calls is, yeah, we think our group will be able to convince them that this is the right way to do things. And this and that. I mean, I haven't been around that long, but 20, 25 years of this, there's no logic. Like, there's no logic in a state legislature. You say, like, it makes total sense for Georgia to legalize this or that. And guess what? 10 years later, they still don't have it. So logic goes out the window. So whenever you start hearing that, I start getting very concerned that there's other stuff afoot.
Well, about a month ago, we had a chairwoman of the Porch Creek talking about Alabama, and that those whole southern states are just pretty wild. But it kind of reminds me of the internet in the early 2000s. It was coming. People didn't know how to tax it. People didn't know what it was going to be. And then all of a sudden you have Amazon that is putting, Walmart out of business, you know, and these things change. And, and I think, and I feel, listen, there's a lot of animosity between traditional commercial gaming industry and the sports betting industry. For the ones that can't get in and the ones that haven't got in, MGM jumped in, they don't really give a crap about anyone but themselves. So, I think you're seeing a lot of these guys jumping ahead. And I think, like the internet, I think the states are starting to go, maybe we didn't really value these things the first time, given the appropriate value. And it almost feels when you say something like that, Steve, that when you say that they can't change their mind on taxation, as a neophyte like I am, I think no, I think maybe when they didn't get it right the first time, they should have every right to get it right the second time, especially when an industry has the type of effect like gambling is having on the industry, which you can't ignore. You can't ignore the gambling addiction issues. You can't ignore the scandals. So it's having an effect. I think the industry has a problem. They have a PR problem. Our friend Chris Grove last week was talking about it. Said the need for improved PR. The industry is starting to be defined by its scandals, not by its victories.
They've
So
lost the narrative completely. So the narrative over the last year and a half has gone to what you said. I think I wrote this a few months ago, but it seems like every week there's a new scandal being reported. Whether it's a true scandal or not is besides the point. That's how it's being framed. And you can pretty much guarantee that every weekend, one of the major papers is going to have some type of social harms article about betting. And it's true because it's anecdotal. You're looking at one person, you're looking at a small group of people, but it's really hard to battle back against that. And it's something that Sheldon Adelson was able to really leverage during the RAWA battles of online casino and changing the Wire Act and all that to stop online casino from proliferating. He was able, him and Andy Abode were able to throw out a talking point, and then myself and everyone else in the industry would spend 2 weeks and 10,000 words trying to refute you have a casino in your pocket. Nobody's paying that type of attention to this. So when if I walk out the door right now and go, just stop the first person, there's a 50-50 chance they even know sports betting is legal in Massachusetts. There's a very, very slim chance. And then they'll be like, oh, what do you mean I can go? There's a shop. They won't know. To what Brendan was saying earlier, people don't know. One of my favorite stats of all time was right after New Jersey legalized online casino. Somebody did a survey of New Jersey residents, and they asked them, what do you bet on online? And do you bet legally or illegally? And I believe it was something like 15%. I don't remember the exact number. It's over a decade ago, but about 15% said they bet legally on online lottery tickets. Okay, well, New Jersey does not have an online lottery. And it was only about like 20% of people that bet online were buying their lottery tickets online. So the vast majority of people who are gambling, buying their lottery tickets online, had no idea they're buying from an illegal site. So when we talk about it, I find, and this is just how we talk in the industry. We have our jargon and our words that we use, but you start talking all these different terms, handle and this, and people know that's how much people bet. That's how you have to convey that message. When you start conveying it as, well, the TAM of the US OSB is this, and people are like, what are you even talking about? I don't know what you're saying. And that's what I always get all the time. That's why I always tell people it's super complex. When people ask me about the casinos in Massachusetts, I'm like, well, there's another casino license that's available, but they're holding that because there's a tribe who's been going through this land and trust thing. They're like, what's land and trust? And I'm like, oh, you don't even know what that is. I forget. So I forget that the person I'm talking to has no idea what I'm talking about. I may as well just be, speaking about, the mechanics of changing the space shuttle's fuel and in altitude or something. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So it's the same thing for them. And I think that's where the messaging has gone astray. We don't have people conveying the message in layman's terms. We have it conveying it in industry terms and refuting. So, the cannibalization arguments that have been going on around online casino, it was a throwaway line in the TIG report. It really wasn't that big of a deal. It stuck out to me because I knew what it was saying, and I knew how people were going to frame it. But we had 3 studies of, I don't know what, 10,000 pages of material to refute this. Nobody cares. Everybody's still got their own facts. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, Brendan, to pick up on what Steve's talking about, since the Washington Post reached out to you, that article was, I don't know what the point of the article was, but there were some decent stats in there, and some of them, to Steve's point, kind of struck me. Boy, there's not a lot of people sports betting out there or willing to admit they're sports betting. And to sort of prove a point, that article had to go into, well, who also buys lottery tickets? And I didn't even understand what the point of bringing in lottery buyers. But to Steve's point, they're trying to like find that cohort there, or that base that's fueling all of this. But then the average person themselves don't even know if they're betting legally or illegally. So the industry, I think it just points out the industry's got a lot of work. But what was your take on that Washington Post article? I don't even know what they were trying to drive at. Like, all this money is mysteriously showing up in sports betting.
Well, and I think I sit there and I scratch my head going, I don't know what he wrote and why he wrote it. And it goes back to the questions that he asked. But I think, to piggyback on some of the things Steve said, it is about education. It is about the same, lexicon out there to say, hey, I don't need to be talking about handle and revenue and all of these types of things. I need to simplify it along the way, to make it easily understood for everybody. It's hence the reason when I started this off using the visual back, and this goes back to before PASPA was repealed, showing an actual dollar and then showing a nickel when it was at 5% hold, and then taking out of that nickel everything else along the way. But you have to put it in those simplest terms. But to the same extent, you have to have a receptive body to be able to do that. And, I didn't respond to the Washington Post thing because, arguably, I will say there's 2 papers I won't reply to anymore. One is the Washington Post. The other one's the New York Times, because about 2 years ago, I got into it with a reporter that kept asking me the same question. And I said, I am never going to say what you want me to say on the record. I don't believe it. I'm not going to say it, and you're not going to get it. So you can either quit asking me the question in the interview, or you can take my word of what I've said. And you look at some of the stories that, I've referred to as clickbait over the time, because if it bleeds, it leads. And every paper's been notorious for that. But you go back to the New York Times series they did, those 4 or 5 articles. I know what people gave them in information, but they chose to do a constructive narrative. And if they're not willing to listen to say, hey, here's how revenue works, here's how taxation works, here's how the industry works, here's how we KYC, here's how we do it, I don't know how the average Joe knows, hey, I know I should be betting on DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM, Fanatics, whatever, versus Bovada. I don't know that answer because no one's telling me that along the way, and it becomes problematic. Back to the original principle is, how do you sit there when California does legalize, whatever year that's in, to make sure, hey, that guy that's been, Victor, when I was down there for the conference down in April, I'm sitting at a restaurant. These guys figure out, the waiter at our table figures out we're involved with the gaming industry. He's telling me left, right. He's trying to pick up tips for his bets before he goes on his app in Bovada and back. And I'm sitting there going, I got to find a way to convert you over. He just wanted the tips along the way, going, hey, what do you guys think is going to happen with the Masters? What's going to happen with this? all those different things. But there's a guy that's doing it today illegally in your state that we've got to convert over. But he's going to sit there and be one of those guys going, well, it's now legal in California, might as well do it. But I got to have a receptive ability to do that. And right now, no matter how much I talk to, I'm blue in the face, whether it be the Times or the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, they're only going to report what they want to report because either they don't get it because they don't want to get it, or two, that's not how they want to report it because it doesn't bleed.
I remember back in prior to 2014 where we were having the same conversation with Online Casino in New Jersey, and Chris Grove and I were talking about what can be done, what can actually be done. And like my perfect world example was we need a DGE seal on these sites. I said we should put it where that deposit bonus is. Put the deposit bonus at the bottom of the page in a little print and put the DGE seal at the top, because I have never seen a survey or a poll that does not show that overwhelmingly people want to bet legally. I think a lot of them are just being fooled into what's legal, and not even in just states that don't have it. The DGE did create that seal eventually, which was good, and it has helped, but it's just not taking up the right real estate. I mean, yeah, you want the deposit bonus too. You want people to see that, but I think sometimes we lose sight of the motivations for people's gambling behaviors. Why are they betting offshore? Well, they're betting offshore because they can't get this specific market in a legal market. Well, maybe some people are, but that doesn't mean they're not betting legally too. We always hear that people have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 apps on their phone. One of them can be an offshore site for those markets that just we don't want in licensed regulated markets, right? We're never going to let them bet on the Little League World Series. Never going to, election betting is a whole different can of worms. But it's one of those things where what are these people's motivations for actually betting, and what are their motivations for betting through a licensed site versus the offshore site? The offshore site has its advantages. Like, we can't just say, there's no reason to bet offshore. Well, if you're a credit better, there is. If you're somebody looking for those fringe markets, there is a reason there. And we can send all the cease and desist letters we want, but that's just creating a vacuum that someone else will fill. Just a game of whack-a-mole. So yeah, you sent it to Bovada, and maybe they complied, but maybe eventually they're like, you know what? It was okay in those 5 other states that we've already left, but now we're getting it from major states that are a significant part of our revenue. You know what? F them all. We're going to go back in on all the states, right? There's no saying they can't do that. And the enforcement is the problem with the offshore sites. Yeah, you can ask the DOJ to do something about it, but they only got the online poker sites by a little bit of luck and, very specific law. And I really liked what Michigan said afterwards, after they sent the cease and desist, which was, we'll go after the suppliers. We'll go after the affiliates. We'll go after the payment processors. That's the only way you stop this. You have to cut off the spigots to all the different channels that they're using to make those bets viable from the U.S. You can shut down Bovada tomorrow, and they just go to a new domain. It's not the hardest thing in the world. I mean, the Netherlands does this all the time. Their blacklist gets updated, I think, every couple of weeks with 700 new sites.
Well, the big question is, then why don't they do it? Is there not an appetite for it, or the will to do it? I mean, why can the Netherlands do it and the United States can't?
I think our friend Richard Schutz has the reason for that, and it's different agencies, right? So you got to have good diplomatic relations with some of these countries, and the U.S. law enforcement is different than the State Department. I think that's how Richard always frames it, and he would know from his experiences what that's like. It's just a very difficult thing to do. I mean, and then obviously these people who are running these multi-million-dollar offshore companies aren't idiots. They know what countries they should be doing it from. Those countries need that tax revenue. For some of them, it's their main tax revenue that they get. So it's a complicated mess of how can we not do this? And I mean, as soon as we shut down PokerStars Full Tilt Ultimate Bet in 2011, America's card room traffic went through the roof. They're still operating. So it's just a vacuum that people will fill. Yeah, we cut down somewhat on the amount of people using those sites because everybody was used to PokerStars Full Tilt. And you got your money tied up for a little bit. So you get a little bit of cold feet going back in. But anybody who wants to do it can still do it.
Yeah, that was so. I think the next question I will be, and before I get to the questions and the thing is, I think it kind of sets it up for online gambling. You know what I mean? Going forward, I think that's what, people are going to see it as, one of the big excuses for sports betting has been, listen, we have to pay out all this money in partnerships and this and that and stuff. Online gaming, the conventional wisdom is that it's all pure cash. You know what I mean? So I think as we move in that direction, that you're going to be looking at, higher 50% tax rates and stuff like that, you know? And is the innovation talking? Is that innovation excuse going to still work? You know, so I don't think FanDuel and DraftKings are going to be leaving Illinois. I think politicians will go where the money is. That seems to be what they've done since that I've been in this watching and active in this industry. So you know what? I think Jeremy and everyone and Brendan and everyone are going to have a very active next 5 years. I think as this industry goes through change, right, Brendan? Are you ready
Hey,
for it?
I'm ready for anything. You know me, I've always been ready for anything. I will say one thing I do want to set the record straight on is if you say you're gonna leave because of X, don't walk into the room, say you're gonna push the nuclear button, and then don't. You know me well enough, Victor. I'm always willing to throw the nuke when I need to along the way, but you can't sit there and because it only hurts you down the way to negotiate with.
Mhm.
Because, at some point somebody says, well, you said you were going to do this and you didn't. So, that's not how I lobby. It's not how I go into situations. It's not how I work with my clients. And that I'm as straight as sheer as you get, and you get what you get. And I'll say it up straight. But, I think that there's, as we continually look at iGaming, and for those remaining states that have sports betting on the table, the conversation has changed over the last 5 years. It's going to change. It's no different than, to some extent, when overall 20 plus years ago, when it was, okay, we're going to do slots. Okay, then we'll get, a little bit more pregnant and do table games.
Boats and moats. Remember boats and moats?
And I mean, I remember the days when you went out on the ship and it was actually out there and did it. It docked, but you couldn't leave for 2 hours along the way. It was
Missouri,
constant evolution of this.
when Prop 5, when we won, or maybe it was 1A, that I think Missouri had the boats and moats. So that was like in early 2000 when that happened too. So that was like, the industry is always going to be changing and always adapting. Hey, listen, our friend Chris Cerroti has a good question here, and I did, but this is a fascinating industry. This is why we work in it. You know what I mean? It's never boring. So our dear friend Chris Cerroti said, how will the tax issue with sports betting potentially impact the legalization of internet gaming? We hear constantly that states will need the money to fill budget holes, but is a 10% realistic, or should the industry be prepared for 25% and above? Chris, I just said 50. So but I'm delusional, and that was just pulling it out of my ear. So
I would say that I would probably expect the bifurcated type of tax that you see in Rhode Island, that you see in Pennsylvania, where slots are taxed at a higher percentage. Maybe there's a third tier that comes after the fact too, but maybe table games are a little bit less. Maybe live dealer games are even less because there's a job creation factor to that, a little bit of business that goes along with it. But from what we've seen over the last few years, not that any bill has really passed other than Rhode Island, the tax rates are creeping way up. On the Maryland's tax rate was very high. They were using that same differentiated structure with their table games and with their slots. So I think that's what I would expect to see if and when online gambling actually starts making some progress through these legislatures. I think you'll see, I mean, the sports betting debate is going to spill over into that. You're going to also have some spillover from the social harms perspective. People are going to say, well, look at all these stories about sports betting. This is going to be even worse. So let's send more money to the responsible gaming, problem gambling side of this. And I just feel like the tax rates will go up, and where that money is earmarked will probably be a little more pointed.
It just feels like an employment opportunities for former legislators is what it feels like to me. You know, sorry, I said it.
Well,
the one thing I guess I would just differ on, and I say this from the standpoint of, when Pennsylvania legalized in 17, they went off their existing slot and table games rates off of that. You look at Rhode Island, similar. You look at Maryland, and I will say, I said this early on when the Maryland study came out, and I think I actually gave this comment to Chris going, you shouldn't take bad tax policy and dovetail on it even more. And I think that's what you have to look at is a Maryland, a Pennsylvania. They reiterated what they were already doing in tax policy. If you go look at bills like we're in Indiana, it was based off of a flat rate that was similar to where you had the existing casinos today. So it becomes a state by state debate along the way. I think yet to be determined what that rate becomes, if it is higher or lower, but I think it's a state by state conversation, not a universal, hey, we're going to go off of what Pennsylvania and Rhode Island did automatically, but they reiterated what they've already done in policy. Maryland basically, and the challenge I think you're going to face next year in Maryland is they're going to have a bigger budget gap, and it's all about meeting a number than it is does it work or doesn't it work along the way for the industry. And it's going to be how many eggs can that golden goose kick out for us?
That was where Pennsylvania was, right? Pennsylvania had to fill a very specific pension deficit that they were facing, and their sports betting tax rate just got pulled out of thin air because nobody knew.
Literally, where can I go in the middle between the two? And that they literally threw a number at the dartboard.
And they said nobody pushed back, so we just went with it. Yeah, because it wasn't legal at the time.
And I remember when we legalized table games back in, was that 9 or 10 in Pennsylvania?
9.
And it was, they initially started at 20 or 22% along the way. We started off at 8. We graduated down to the, what I always referred to as the Lobbyist Full Employment Act, because it was, hey, we're going to be at 14, but after 3 years, we're going to kick down to 12. It never kicked down to 12 along the way. Yeah. And then it went up back based on the 17 language, and that's when it went up.
Listen, the politicians to play that game too. You know what I mean? This will be a temporary pain and stuff like that. Well, listen, one of the last things I remember last week at the end of, I think the NFL was talking about federal legislation. So that was the one that I've seen. So let's have it before we go. Do you think that's going to be possible now? I mean, I think with this dysfunction and, but I think it takes something really big and monumental to move through it. And I think, sports and the way it's being affected, I think, you have another big scandal, you know what I mean? That's what's going to do, you have Tom Brady or somebody betting on the sidelines in the middle of a game on their phone, the next thing you know, you're going to have it. So I think it's coming, guys, so I shocked them both.
No, you didn't shock us. I was waiting to see if Steve jumped in, but I'll say this: if you see federal legislation of this industry, we're done.
We know better.
It's over.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much my take.
You might as well call it a day, because one, this isn't how this country's founded. It wasn't about, a federalized system off of that. And especially what got us into this is each state sets their own policy. And I know there's groups out there advocating for it, and those groups I argue are also, shills for the illegal industry along the way. But if you federalize this, there's a lot of state tax revenue that's going to go away that helps out education and healthcare and environment and other things that goes away very quickly. And that's
but Steve, you had the NFL, and they looked like they were dragged into this. They were not willing participants, and now they're saying, we didn't want to do this. Now you guys got into it. What are we going to do to take care of it? And I think those are the type of arguments that are going to just steamroll over this industry, man. And I'm telling you, you're going to get one of these college kids betting on the side of the game, and it's going to happen. You're going to need a big scandal like that, and the industry is not going to have an answer for it, man. So they
I've
need.
said that federal oversight of some kind will happen eventually. Whether that's in 2 years or 10 years, I couldn't tell you because, as Chris says, Congress can't even pass a budget.
Right.
But you have I mean, gambling creates very strange bedfellows, right? So there isn't a partisan divide on this. There's people on both sides of the aisle that are for it and against it. In California, we had some very strange bedfellows during that whole poker debate. There was all kinds of craziness going on there. So you have in the federal department, you have the NBA has said something recently that maybe there should be some federal oversight. The NCAA would jump all over that chance. You have the National Council of Problem Gambling, who's going for the Grid Act. So all of these divergent forces could coalesce around some type of legislation. The question is, what does that legislation look like? Is it light touch? Probably not. It's the Congress. It would be probably a disaster with everybody trying to get their little 2 cents into it. And it just becomes the open problem of, is it a nothing because it's so overwhelming, or is it like very crippling to the industry? I think that's where it will come down to. But I think we're still a ways away from that. But I do see a certain inevitability to it.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it on that one because that fits into what I believe. No, I'm just joking. Because we ran out of time. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you,
Brendan,
Steve.
thank you so
Brendan,
much.
thank you,
What a
guys.
great conversation, guys. We really
love having
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for everybody who
Appreciate it.
joined us. And listen, we're going to be on the road next week. We're going to be up in Washington, but we'll be back the week after that. And we'll be continue having these conversations. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was a blast. Appreciate it. Bye-bye, guys. See you next week or 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.